The night Nathaniel Whitaker told 500 guests he had lost everything, the only person who believed in him was the woman he was lying to. The ballroom of the Astoria Grand glittered like Manhattan had been poured into crystal. Chandeliers burned above white roses and gold-rimmed champagne glasses. A string quartet played near the marble staircase. Cameras flashed along the velvet ropes where reporters waited for the perfect photograph of America's most admired young billionaire, and the fiancée everyone said did not belong in his world. Nathaniel Whitaker stood near the stage in a black tuxedo, his hand resting lightly around the microphone. His face calm enough to fool almost anyone. 36 years old, founder and chief executive officer of Whitaker Industries, heir to a fortune that moved through steel, energy, real estate, and technology. He looked exactly like a man who could not fall. But beneath the tailored jacket, his pulse was hammering. Across the ballroom, Emma Carlisle stood in a pale blue evening gown she had chosen because it reminded her of spring mornings outside the elementary school where she used to teach. She was 29, white, soft-faced, steady-eyed, with light brown hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck and an engagement ring bright on her left hand. She did not move like the women born into rooms like this. She still said thank you to waiters. She still looked uncomfortable when strangers complimented the size of the diamond before they complimented her. She still carried herself like someone who had known the price of groceries before she knew the price of champagne. That was one reason Nate loved her. It was also the reason he had become terrified she might not love him back if the champagne disappeared. Vanessa Hart stood beside the front table in a silver dress, watching Emma with the patient smile of someone waiting for a prediction to come true. Vanessa had known Nate since boarding school, known his family, his old wounds, his fear of being wanted for the Whitaker name instead of the man beneath it. She had whispered for weeks that Emma's kindness was charming. Yes, but charm did not survive bankruptcy. Preston Vale, Nate's financial advisor, stood near the stage steps with a folded statement in his hand and a face as smooth as polished stone. It was Preston who had called the plan a necessary emotional stress test. It was Preston who had told Nate, better to know before the wedding than after she owns half your life. Nate had hated the words. Then he had repeated them in his head until they sounded almost reasonable. Now the room quieted. Forks paused above plates. Cameras lifted. Emma looked at him with a small, encouraging smile, the kind she gave nervous children before school plays, as if she thought the richest man in the room might still need someone to believe he could speak. Nate almost stopped. One breath, one word, one honest sentence could have ended it. He could have stepped down from the stage, crossed the ballroom, taken her hand, and told her he was scared. Instead, he looked at the prepared statement and chose the lie. Thank you all for being here tonight, he began. His voice carried easily through the ballroom, deep, controlled, familiar to shareholders and reporters. This evening was meant to celebrate my engagement to Emma Carlisle and the future we hoped to build together. Emma's smile softened at the word together. Nate felt it hit him like a hand against the chest. But before we celebrate anything, he continued, I owe everyone the truth. A ripple moved through the crowd. Vanessa's lips curved almost invisibly. Preston lowered his eyes, satisfied. Nate gripped the microphone tighter. As of tonight, I am no longer a billionaire. The silence that followed was so complete the ice in someone's glass could be heard shifting. Emma blinked once. Her smile vanished. Not into disgust, not into fear, but into immediate concern. Nate forced himself forward. Whitaker Industries has suffered a catastrophic financial collapse. Several major assets are frozen. Emergency restructuring begins tomorrow. The penthouse is being listed. The wedding may need to be postponed indefinitely. I understand if tonight changes how some of you see me. It did. He watched it happen in real time. Men who had begged for meetings 2 hours earlier looked down at their phones. Women who had kissed Emma's cheeks now whispered behind manicured hands. A board member stepped back from the stage as if financial failure could spread through the carpet. Vanessa looked straight at Emma, waiting. Everyone was waiting. This was the moment Nate had designed. The cruel little stage he had built inside a party full of roses. He expected shock first, then tears, then questions about the wedding, the ring, the house, the lifestyle. He expected Emma to look at the diamond and realize the dream had cracked. Instead, Emma did something no one expected. She bent down, slipped off her high heels, and left them beside her chair. Barefoot on the polished ballroom floor, she walked toward the stage through a sea of frozen guests. Every step was quiet. Every camera followed. Nate's throat tightened. Emma, he said softly when she reached him. But the microphone caught it, sending her name across the room like a plea. She did not take the microphone from him. She took his free hand. Her fingers were warm. Her grip did not tremble. Are you safe? She asked. The room seemed to exhale in confusion. Nate stared at her. What? Are you safe? She repeated, her voice steady enough for the front rows to hear. Have you eaten today? Did you sleep last night? Are the employees going to be paid? Somewhere behind her, Vanessa's expression sharpened. Preston's jaw tightened. Nate could not answer. None of these questions had been in the script. Emma turned toward the crowd, still holding his hand. Her bare feet stood where her satin shoes should have been, and somehow she looked more graceful than anyone in diamonds. "If you came here to celebrate his fortune," she said, "then you may leave. If you came here because you love him, stay." A stunned murmur rolled through the ballroom. Nate felt heat rise behind his eyes and hated himself for it. Emma looked back at him, and there was no calculation in her face, no disappointment over lost luxury, no secret relief that she still had time to escape. There was only worry. For him. For the people who worked for him. For the life he had. 3 weeks before the ballroom went silent, Nathaniel Whitaker stood in his private elevator above Manhattan, watching his own reflection rise through glass and steel, and wondered how a man could own half a skyline and still feel haunted by one question. Would she stay if it all disappeared? The elevator climbed toward his penthouse on the 92nd floor, silent except for the low mechanical hum beneath his shoes. Below him, New York moved in bright winter lines. Yellow cabs on wet pavement, office windows burning past midnight, tiny people hurrying through a city that forgave success faster than it forgave failure. Nate should have felt untouchable. Whitaker Industries had just closed a $2 billion infrastructure contract. Forbes had called him the safest young titan in America. His face was on business magazines, charity banners, investor decks, and the society pages now that he was engaged to Emma Carlisle, the former elementary school teacher who smiled at doormen like they were old friends and still wrote thank you notes by hand. Everyone said he was lucky. Nate knew he was. That was what terrified him. The elevator opened into the penthouse, where floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around marble floors, low leather furniture, and a living room so perfectly designed it never felt lived in until Emma entered it. Tonight, she was barefoot on the rug in front of the fireplace, sitting cross-legged with a stack of student letters in her lap. She had brought them from the school where she used to teach before the engagement turned her life into camera flashes and security schedules. A mug of tea sat beside her. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. The diamond ring on her finger caught the firelight, but she did not look at it. She was reading a crooked crayon note from one of her old students and smiling like it was worth more than the penthouse. Nate stopped in the doorway. For one soft second, the fear loosened. Then Emma looked up. "You are home late. Board dinner ran long. Did you eat?" He almost laughed. Not because the question was funny, but because no one else asked it that way. Investors asked whether he was confident. Reporters asked whether he was expanding. Board members asked whether he was prepared. Emma asked whether he had eaten. "I had something at the club." "That means no." She stood, went to the kitchen, and returned with leftover soup she had made herself because she said even billionaires needed normal food. Nate watched her place the bowl on the table, watched her tuck one leg beneath her as she sat beside him, watched her face soften when he took the spoon. It should have been enough. It almost was. But love, to Nate, had always arrived carrying a second face. His father, Charles Whitaker, had been brilliant, generous, and lonely after Nate's mother died. When Nate was 19, Charles fell in love with a woman who wore kindness like silk. She praised his dreams, held his hand at galas, called him her safest place in the world. Then, when a market crash hit and Charles lost a third of his fortune in one brutal quarter, she vanished with jewelry, private account access, and a letter that began with, "I did not sign up for a sinking ship." Charles never recovered fully from the humiliation. He rebuilt the money, but not the trust. Nate learned the lesson too well. People could love the room, the lights, the name, the security, the view. The man underneath was harder to prove. "What is that face?" Emma asked. Nate blinked. "What face?" "The one where you are in a meeting with a ghost." He looked at her then, startled by how close she always came to the truth without being invited. "Just tired." Emma did not push. That was another thing that made him afraid. She respected doors, even when she knew something was behind them. The next morning, Vanessa Hart arrived at Whitaker Tower in a white coat and red lipstick, carrying coffee she would not drink and opinions she had no intention of softening. Vanessa had grown up beside Nate in the private ecosystem of old money and closed clubs. She knew which families had power, which smiles hid debt, which marriages were mergers with better flowers. She kissed Nate on both cheeks in his office and glanced at the framed photo of Emma on his desk. "She is still doing the schoolteacher charm thing?" Nate looked up from a contract. "Good morning to you too." "I am serious." Vanessa sat without being asked. "The public loves her because she looks sincere. That does not mean she is." "Emma is sincere." "Maybe. Or maybe she understands that sincerity is the one luxury your circle cannot manufacture." Nate's jaw tightened. "Careful." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice gentler now, which made it worse. "I am being careful. You are the one about to marry a woman who had nothing 6 months ago and now has access to everything. Your homes, your shares, your name, your foundation, your boardroom. She has never asked me for any of it. The smart ones never do." The words lodged under his skin. He hated Vanessa for saying them because some damaged part of him had already whispered the same thing at 3 in the morning. Later that afternoon, Preston Vale closed Nate's office door with the solemn expression of a man about to recommend surgery. Preston was in his early 50s, smooth-haired, precise, and trusted by the board because he never panicked in public. He placed a folder on Nate's desk. You asked me how to know before the wedding. Nate stared at the folder. I asked hypothetically. There are no hypothetical consequences after marriage. Nate did not open it. What is this? A controlled reputational stress test. Preston said it as if naming it professionally removed the cruelty. Temporary announcement of severe financial distress. Frozen assets. Possible restructuring. A lifestyle downgrade. Nothing legally binding. Nothing that cannot be reversed. You observe how Miss Carlyle responds when the Whitaker protection disappears. Nate stood and walked to the window. Far below, the city looked orderly, as if human lives could be managed by height. That is deception. It is due diligence. She is not a company. No, Preston said. She is the person who may one day own influence over one. Nate turned. I love her. Preston did not flinch. Then you should want to know whether she loves you, or the empire around you. The office went quiet. Nate thought of Emma warming soup in his perfect kitchen. Emma laughing with his driver. Emma keeping student letters in a penthouse drawer because she missed being useful in a simple way. He thought of his father reading that goodbye letter with a face that never fully came back. He thought of Vanessa's warning, the board's concerns, the fortune that made every relationship feel like a contract someone else had already drafted. No public humiliation, Nate said finally, though the words tasted wrong before they left his mouth. Preston nodded. Of course, controlled, private at first. But as Nate looked down at the folder, he missed the smallest shift in Preston's eyes. The quiet satisfaction of a man whose plan had never been only about Emma. That night, when Nate returned to the penthouse, Emma was asleep on the couch with a children's book open on her chest and a sticky note on the coffee table that read, "Soup in the fridge. Please eat before becoming dramatic." Nate stood there for a long time, holding a lie he had not yet spoken, watching the woman he loved breathe softly beneath the city lights. He told himself the test would protect them both. He told himself truth was worth one painful experiment. He told himself he would stop if it went too far. But the first betrayal had already happened, because the next morning, he called Preston and said, "Start building the scenario." Preston Vale built the lie with the care of an architect designing a house no one was supposed to live in. He called it temporary, controlled, reversible, and every polished word made it sound less like betrayal and more like strategy. For the next 5 days, Nathaniel Whitaker watched the machinery form around him from the top floor of Whitaker Tower, where conference rooms smelled of coffee, leather, and expensive confidence. Preston drafted statements about frozen assets, delayed contracts, and emergency restructuring. A trusted public relations consultant prepared talking points for a personal financial setback. A real estate broker was quietly instructed to create paperwork suggesting the penthouse might be listed. 2 cars were removed from Nate's garage and sent to storage. His private chef was put on leave. A modest furnished apartment in Brooklyn was leased under a holding company. A small 2-bedroom walk-up with noisy pipes, chipped white cabinets, and a view of a brick wall. It has to feel real, Preston said, placing photographs of the apartment on Nate's desk. If she believes the safety net remains, the test means nothing. Nate looked at the photos. The living room was barely wider than his current closet. The kitchen had one narrow window and a stove old enough to have opinions. This is too far. Preston folded his hands. You asked for certainty. Certainty has a cost. Nate pushed the photos away. She is not an applicant. She is the woman I am going to marry. Then she should pass without difficulty. The sentence was smooth, but it scraped something raw inside him. Nate wanted to throw the folder into the trash. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city. From up here, every street looked straight, every problem small. That was the lie height told rich men. Down there, people lived inside consequences. Emma lived down there once, before cameras began following her and strangers started measuring her worth by his last name. He thought of her standing outside her old school with chalk dust on her sleeve, waving at children through the fence because she missed them. He thought of the way she insisted on taking the subway sometimes because she said cities felt different when you actually moved with them. He thought of her asking if employees would be paid before she asked what would happen to the wedding. And still, the old fear whispered. What if? Vanessa made sure that whisper never went quiet. She found him that afternoon in the private club off Madison Avenue, where the walls were paneled in dark oak and the men at neighboring tables spoke softly about money they would never touch with their own hands. She slid into the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. Preston told me you are moving forward. Nate's eyes narrowed. Preston talks too much. He worries. So do I. You do not worry. You evaluate. Vanessa smiled. That is why people should listen to me. A waiter poured water. Vanessa waited until he left before leaning in. Emma may surprise you for a day or two. Women like her understand loyalty looks good at first. The real answer comes when discomfort becomes routine. No penthouse. No driver. No wedding magazines. No society glow. Then you will know. Nate looked at her over the rim of his glass. Women like her. Do not pretend you do not know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. That is the problem. Vanessa's smile cooled. I am trying to protect you from sentiment. Maybe sentiment is not the disease you think it is. Maybe not. But poverty is an excellent truth serum. Nate hated that line most because it sounded like something his father might have believed after being left. By the time he returned to the penthouse that evening, Emma was on the floor surrounded by wedding samples she clearly did not care about. Cream envelopes, floral cards, seating charts, ribbon colors. She held up 2 nearly identical napkins as he entered. Important question. Is ivory different from warm ivory? Or is this a test to see how much nonsense a person can survive before marriage? Nate tried to smile. Warm ivory sounds like a weather condition. Thank you. I knew I loved you for your wisdom. The word loved moved through him with unbearable gentleness. He loosened his tie and sat beside her. For a few minutes, he let himself exist in the life he was about to damage. Emma placed a napkin over his knee like a blanket. You are quiet. Long day. Bored trouble. He looked at her hands, at the ring, at the small scar on her thumb from when she burned herself baking cupcakes for a school fundraiser. Maybe. She stopped sorting samples. Nate, if something is wrong, you can tell me. There it was. A door. Open. Warm. Honest. He could walk through it. He could say, I am afraid you love the world around me more than me. I am ashamed of that fear. Help me be better than it. But fear had a strange talent for imitating caution. Not tonight, he said. Emma studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, but not forever. He looked at her. What does that mean? It means secrets get heavier when people carry them alone. She went back to the napkins, unaware she had placed her hand directly over the wound. The next morning, Preston began moving pieces from theater into reality. He had select internal memos drafted, vague enough to avoid legal exposure, serious enough to create atmosphere. He arranged for several senior executives to believe a restructuring review was underway. He told Nate it was necessary for authenticity. Nate approved only what he understood, and that was his second mistake. The first was the test. The second was believing Preston's loyalty belonged to him. In a quiet office 2 floors below Nate's, Preston met with a bored ally named Gregory Shaw, a man who had always thought Nate was too young, too emotional, too beloved by employees to be easily controlled. Preston closed the blinds before handing him a private memo. The announcement will shake confidence, Preston said. Gregory read quickly. Enough to force a leadership review? If handled correctly. And Whitaker thinks this is about the girl? Preston's mouth curved. Men in love rarely notice the boardroom behind the curtain. That afternoon, an anonymous message went to a financial gossip account hinting that Whitaker Industries was facing severe liquidity pressure. Preston did not send it from his own device. He was too careful for that. But he watched the rumor appear online by D. By the next evening, the rumor had already reached the parts of Manhattan that smiled in public and panicked in private. Nate felt it in the way his calls were answered half a second too slowly, in the careful pauses of bankers who had never paused before, in the sudden warmth of people preparing to step away without seeming unkind. Whitaker Industries had not collapsed. His accounts were not frozen. The infrastructure contract was still alive. Yet the story of his fall had begun moving ahead of him like a shadow with better shoes. At 7 o'clock, he returned to the penthouse and found Emma standing by the windows, looking down at the city with her arms folded across her chest. The apartment behind her was too beautiful for the conversation waiting inside it. White marble, amber lamps, fresh orchids, a skyline burning blue and gold beyond the glass. On the coffee table lay her wedding binder, open to a page of venue deposits and floral estimates. Beside it, her phone kept lighting up with messages she had not answered. Nate stopped near the doorway. For the first time since the test began, the lie felt visible in the room, sitting between them like a third person. Emma turned before he spoke. Her face was calm, but not untouched. She had been a teacher long enough to recognize when someone was hiding the truth badly. Is it real? She asked. Nate had rehearsed this moment with Preston. He had been told to look tired, not guilty. Broken, not evasive. Honest enough to hurt, not honest enough to reveal the fraud beneath it. But no rehearsal prepared him for Emma's eyes. They were not greedy. They were not angry. They were afraid for him. That made the lie almost impossible to say, and somehow he said it anyway. Yes, he answered quietly. Parts of it are real. It was the coward's version of a confession, and he knew it. Emma stepped away from the window. What parts? Nate looked down at his hands. The same hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without shaking. There are liquidity issues. Assets may be frozen while everything is reviewed. The penthouse will probably need to be listed. The wedding. He let the sentence break. The wedding cannot stay as planned. Emma was silent. He waited for the first question. How much money is left? What happens to the ring? What about the estate? What about the honeymoon, the house, the security, the name? She asked none of them. She crossed the room and stood in front of him close enough that he could see the tiny line between her brows, the one that appeared whenever she was trying not to cry in front of someone who needed her steady. Have you slept? Nate blinked. Emma, have you slept? Not much. Have you eaten? His throat tightened. No. She nodded once, as if the most urgent crisis in a billionaire's financial collapse was still the man forgetting to eat. Sit down. You do not understand. Then explain while you eat. She walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and began taking out leftovers with the kind of calm that made his chest ache. Nate followed her, anger rising now because guilt needed somewhere to go. Emma, I just told you I may have lost everything. She set a container of soup on the counter and looked back at him. No, you told me you may have lost money, property, and a wedding venue. That is not everything. The sentence hit him so hard he looked away. Emma softened, but she did not retreat. Are employees going to lose jobs? Possibly. Are they going to lose health insurance? Nate hesitated. He had not expected her to go there first, not privately, not before asking what would happen to her. I do not know. Then we find out. We. Yes, we. She placed the soup in the microwave, then reached for the wedding binder. Nate watched her flip through pages of deposits, menus, flowers, musicians, hotel blocks, all the glittering pieces of a day she had pretended not to care about because everyone else cared too loudly. She pulled out a pen. We cancel the orchids. Nate stared. Emma. Nobody needs $40,000 of orchids. She crossed out another line. We cancel the string quartet. Another line. The ice sculpture was ridiculous anyway. Despite himself, Nate almost laughed, but the sound died before it formed. You should not have to do this. Of course I should. I am marrying you, not renting a fantasy for rich people to approve. She moved to the next page. We can move the ceremony somewhere smaller. A courthouse. A church basement. My old school gym if they still like me after the paparazzi scared the principal. Nate reached for her hand to stop the pen. What if there is no ceremony? Emma looked up. The question should have shaken her. Instead, it revealed the part of her love he had been too afraid to trust. Then there is still you. His breath caught. She gently turned her hand under his, lacing their fingers. Nate, look at me. I did not say yes because of this apartment. I did not say yes because of the cars or the magazines, or because people started opening doors when I walked beside you. Half of that made me uncomfortable anyway. A small smile trembled and vanished. I said yes because one night after a fundraiser, you stayed behind to help stack chairs when no one was watching. Because you remembered the name of my student who needed a scholarship. Because you listen better when you forget to act powerful. Nate felt the lie twist inside him. He wanted to confess. The words rose into his throat, hot and dangerous. It is not real. I did this because I was afraid. I let them turn your heart into an experiment. But then his phone buzzed. Preston's name glowed on the screen. Nate did not answer. Emma noticed anyway. Is that work? Yes. Then call them after you eat. She removed the soup from the microwave, set it in front of him, and sat beside him at the kitchen island. For 10 minutes, she made him take spoonfuls while asking practical questions in a soft voice. Which employees were most at risk? Could executive bonuses be redirected? Could her wedding dress deposit be recovered? Could the ring be sold quickly if necessary? At that, Nate went still. No. Emma looked at the diamond on her hand, then slowly slipped it off. The absence of it left a pale circle on her finger. She placed it on the counter between them. It is beautiful, she said, but if it can help keep someone's lights on, it is just a stone. Nate stared at the ring. Vanessa's voice echoed in his memory. Poverty is an excellent truth serum. But this The next morning, Emma Carlyle woke before sunrise and began packing the penthouse as if love could survive anything if someone folded it carefully enough. Manhattan was still blue-gray beyond the windows, the city not yet loud, the glass towers holding the last darkness in their walls. Nate stood in the bedroom doorway and watched her place sweaters, books, and a framed photo of her old classroom into cardboard boxes that looked almost absurd against the Italian marble floor. She did not pack like a woman leaving luxury behind in panic. She packed like a woman organizing a field trip, practical, focused, determined not to let fear make her careless. On the dresser, the engagement ring flashed beneath the soft lamp, still on her finger, but everything around it was changing. The penthouse staff had been reduced. The chef was gone. 2 cars had disappeared from the garage. The broker had called twice about staging the apartment for a possible private listing. Every false detail Preston had created now pressed against the walls of their real life. Emma taped one box shut and looked up. The apartment in Brooklyn. Is it safe? Nate swallowed. It is small. That was not my question. Yes, it is safe. Then we go today. He crossed the room. You do not have to come with me. Emma stared at him as if he had just failed the easiest question on a test. Where exactly do you think I would go? Back to your mother's house. A hotel. Anywhere easier than this. Nate, easier is not a place. It is a choice. And I already made mine. She picked up another box, then stopped when she saw his face. Unless you are asking me to leave. The pain in her voice was small, but it cut deeper than anger. Nate stepped forward immediately. No, never. The lie beneath that truth twisted inside him. He did want her with him. He wanted her so badly that he had built a false disaster to make sure she would stay. By noon, they left the penthouse through the service elevator to avoid the reporters already gathering outside the main lobby. The moving truck carried only what Emma called necessary things. Clothes, a few books, bedding, basic dishes, a coffee maker she insisted no crisis should be without, and a box of handwritten letters from her former students. Nate had expected her to hesitate when the penthouse door closed behind them. She did not. She only looked once at the skyline, then said, "It was beautiful, but it was never what made me feel at home." The Brooklyn apartment sat above a small hardware store on a busy block where buses sighed at the curb and someone's radio played through an open window. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint, laundry detergent, and garlic from a restaurant downstairs. The stairs creaked. The key stuck. The living room floor slanted slightly toward the window. Nate carried 2 boxes inside and felt his chest tighten with shame. Not because the apartment was terrible, but because Emma looked around and immediately began imagining how to make it livable while he stood there remembering that none of this had to be happening. "The light is good," she said, pulling back a beige curtain that had seen better years. Outside was a brick wall, 1 fire escape, and a narrow slice of sky. "Emma, what? You do not have to pretend this is good." She turned, hands on her hips. "I am not pretending. Good is not the same as fancy. This is clean enough, warm enough, and close to a subway line. The stove looks dramatic, but I have met dramatic appliances before." He almost smiled. She saw it and pointed at him. "There. That is the first useful thing you have done today." For the next 6 hours, Emma worked as if rebuilding was not a tragedy but a schedule. She scrubbed the cabinets, taped brown paper over a cracked drawer, made a grocery list with prices beside each item, and set up the coffee maker in the corner like it was a sacred machine. Nate tried to help, clumsy in ways that would have been funny if his guilt had not been so heavy. He did not know which cleaner went on which surface. He folded sheets like a man negotiating with fabric. He stared at the radiator when it clanked as though it had insulted him. Emma laughed for the first time all day, a Real laugh, and the sound filled the small room more warmly than any fireplace in the penthouse ever had. That evening, she made spaghetti with canned tomatoes, garlic, and too much black pepper because she said black pepper made cheap meals taste like decisions. They ate at a folding table by the window, knees nearly touching because there was nowhere else to put them. The apartment was still half boxes, half dust, but Emma had placed a yellow sticky note on the refrigerator. Nate noticed it when he carried the dishes to the sink. Written in her neat teacher handwriting were the words, "We rebuild one day at a time." He stood there too long. Emma came up beside him. "Too sentimental?" "No," he said, his voice rough. "It is perfect." She leaned her shoulder lightly against his. "Then believe it." Nate closed his eyes. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to confess until the room broke open and let the truth breathe. But his phone buzzed on the counter. Preston. Then Vanessa. Then Preston again. Emma glanced at the screen, and the softness faded. "You should answer if it is about employees." Nate answered Preston first. He put the call on speaker without meaning to, maybe because some part of him was tired of carrying the lie alone. Preston's voice filled the tiny kitchen. "The public story is spreading faster than expected. Tomorrow's dinner with Vanessa may help manage optics. You both should attend. It will show stability." Emma folded her arms. "Stability for whom?" Preston went silent. Nate looked at her, then at the phone. "Emma is here." Pause. Then Preston's voice returned smoother. "Miss Carlyle, I only mean that supportive friends can be valuable during transition." Emma looked at Nate, not Preston. "Is Vanessa a supportive friend?" Nate could not answer quickly enough. Emma nodded once, understanding more than he said. "Then we will go," she said. "But not to prove I belong in their room. To see who still thinks you do." Vanessa Hart chose a private dining room at the Meridian Club because humiliation, in her world, always looked better beneath chandeliers. The room sat above Midtown with tall windows, dark velvet curtains, silver candles, and a view of Manhattan glittering as if nothing cruel could happen in a place with such expensive lighting. Emma noticed the details the moment she entered. The table set for 12 though Vanessa had called it intimate. The champagne already poured though Nate was supposedly broke. The empty chair beside Vanessa placed like a witness stand, and the way every guest paused when she walked in wearing a simple black dress from her old closet instead of something borrowed from a designer. Nate stood beside her in the only dark suit he had brought to Brooklyn, his jaw tight, his hand hovering near her back without touching, as if he was afraid she might shatter if he reminded her he was there. Emma did not shatter. She smiled at the hostess, thanked the waiter, and sat down as if she had not spent the afternoon scrubbing their tiny apartment sink and calculating grocery money on the back of an envelope. Vanessa rose with perfect warmth. "Emma, you look lovely. Very practical." The word practical slid across the table and landed near Emma's plate like a stain. "Thank you," Emma said. "You look expensive." A few guests looked down to hide their amusement. Nate coughed softly into his water. Vanessa's smile sharpened. "I thought tonight might be helpful. Friends should gather when life changes." "Is that what this is?" Emma asked. "Friends gathering." Vanessa placed a hand over her heart. Of course, Nate has always had people who care about him. She glanced around the table, at the men and women who had called Nate brilliant when he was rich and now studied him like a risky investment. We are all concerned. Dinner began with tiny portions on wide white plates, food arranged like artwork no one was meant to enjoy. Conversation stayed polite for nearly 10 minutes. Then a man in a burgundy tie, someone Nate had once helped secure funding for a hotel project, leaned back and said, "So, Nate, what does one do after losing that much? Consulting? Advisory work?" Another guest smiled. "Motivational speaking, perhaps. People adore comeback stories." Nate's fingers tightened around his fork. Emma felt it in the air, the way everyone had come not to comfort him but to measure how far he had fallen. Vanessa watched Emma over her wineglass. "And you, Emma? This must be such an adjustment. From penthouse views to—" She paused delicately. "Brooklyn." Emma took a sip of water. "Brooklyn has excellent bagels. How resilient. How surprising that you find that surprising." The table quieted again. Vanessa laughed, light and false. "I admire loyalty, truly. I just wonder whether love feels different when the lifestyle changes." Emma looked at Nate. His face had gone pale beneath the warm lights. She could see shame in him but not the full shape of it. She thought he was ashamed of losing money. She did not know he was ashamed because every insult aimed at her had been invited by his lie. Before she could answer, a woman near the end of the table tilted her head. "I suppose the question everyone is too polite to ask is simple. Are you still marrying him without the fortune?" A small thrill passed through the room. There it was. The reason for the dinner. Not support. Not friendship. A trial with dessert service. Nate pushed back his chair. "Enough." But Emma touched his wrist. "No, it is all right." She stood slowly, not dramatically, not angrily, but with the calm of a teacher who had finally decided the room needed a lesson. The city lights behind her framed her like a quiet storm. "If money was the reason to love him," she said, looking around the table, "then none of you ever knew him." Vanessa's smile vanished. Emma continued, her voice steady and clear. "You loved the access, the headlines, the invitations, the way his name made your projects safer and your introductions easier. You loved what standing near him did for you. And now that you think that glow is gone, you are calling it concern." Nate stared at her. Every word struck him twice, once because she was defending him, and once because she was unknowingly condemning him. Emma looked at the woman who had asked the question. "Yes, I am still marrying him. Not because I am brave. Not because I am noble. Because love is not a stock price. It does not drop because the market gets nervous. If he has to start over, I will start over with him. If the wedding becomes 10 people and a grocery store cake, then I hope the cake is chocolate. If the apartment is small, we will learn where to put things. If people leave, we will know who was only renting space in his life." Silence filled the room, thick and complete. Nate rose beside her, his eyes bright with something he would not let fall. "Emma," he whispered. She finally looked at him, and her expression softened only for him. "You are not worth less because you have less." That sentence nearly broke him. He opened his mouth. The truth was there, ready, brutal, necessary. But Preston appeared at his side before he could speak, having entered quietly during her speech. His face calm but his hand firm around Nate's arm. "Not here," Preston murmured. "You will destroy her publicly if you panic now." Nate froze. Emma saw Preston touch him and frowned. Vanessa saw the hesitation and moved quickly. "What a beautiful speech," she said, rising with slow applause that no one joined at first. "Really, Emma, so heartfelt. I only hope reality is as romantic as you make it sound." Emma sat down, but her hands trembled beneath the table where only Nate could see. He reached for them, and the morning after Vanessa's dinner, the Brooklyn apartment, felt smaller than before, not because the walls had moved, but because the lie had. It had followed Nate and Emma home in the headlights, climbed the narrow staircase behind them, and settled into the kitchen beside the yellow sticky note that still read, "We rebuild one day at a time." Nate barely slept. He sat at the folding table with his laptop open, watching headlines multiply across financial sites, each one sharper than the last. Whitaker Industries denies insolvency rumors. Board sources express concern. Investors seek clarity. The words were no longer part of Preston's controlled scenario. They were becoming weather, and real people were already getting wet. Emma woke before dawn to find Nate staring at the screen, his coffee untouched, his face gray with exhaustion. She did not ask if he was scared. She could see that he was. Instead, she put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Give me names." He looked up. "What?" "Employees most at risk. People who might lose paychecks, health insurance, rent money. Give me names." Nate closed the laptop halfway. "Emma, that is not your responsibility. Do not do that." Her voice was soft, but it stopped him. "Do not make love sound like a guest pass I only get to use when things look pretty." He stared at her, guilt rising like water in his throat. "You cannot fix this." "Maybe not, but I can help someone survive the week." By 8, Emma had made calls. By 9, she had learned that several junior employees in a logistics division had been told their contract renewals were delayed because of the uncertainty. By 10, she had spoken to a single mother in payroll whose health coverage was caught in an administrative hold, and a warehouse supervisor in Jersey City who was 2 weeks behind on rent because overtime had been frozen during the supposed restructuring review. Nate listened from across the room, each conversation cutting deeper than the last. This was what he had not understood when Preston called the test controlled. A rumor did not stay inside a billionaire's fear. Traveled down. It found the people without savings, without lawyers, without second homes. It knocked on doors he would never see. Emma wrote every name in a notebook with the same careful handwriting she once used for lesson plans. Then she opened a small wooden box she had brought from the penthouse and took out a delicate gold necklace with a tiny pearl pendant. Nate knew it at once. Her mother had given it to her on the day she graduated college. Emma closed her fingers around it for a moment, then slipped it into her coat pocket. No, Nate said immediately. She did not look at him. Yes. Emma, please. Not that. She turned then, and the pain in her face was not weakness. It was resolve. Someone's medicine is more important than jewelry sitting in a box. I can find another way. Can you? The question was not cruel, but it landed like judgment. Nate could have paid every one of those bills before lunch. He could have ended the charade with one call. But the truth was now tangled with board pressure, investor panic, and Preston's warnings. Every hour he waited made the confession larger. Every sacrifice Emma made him smaller. That afternoon, she pawned the necklace at a shop near Atlantic Avenue and came back with an envelope of cash, red eyes, and no complaint. She split the money into smaller envelopes at the kitchen table. Nate watched her write names on each one. You should hate me, he said before he could stop himself. Emma paused. For being broke? His silence answered wrong. She studied him, and something uncertain passed over her face. But then her phone rang. It was Vanessa. Emma almost ignored it, then answered on speaker. Vanessa's voice came smooth and bright through the tiny apartment. Emma, I wanted to apologize for last night. Some of the guests were unkind. Some of the guests were honest about being unkind, Emma said. There is a difference. A short silence. Then Vanessa sighed. I am going to be direct. You are making a noble mistake. Nate's situation is worse than he admits. If you walk away now, people will understand. I can arrange $500,000 for you discreetly and a teaching position at a private academy in Connecticut. Clean start. No scandal. No debt. No small apartment. Nate froze. Emma looked at him. For one terrible second, he saw the life he had offered her by pretending to lose everything, and the life Vanessa offered her to escape it. Security, respect, a classroom, money enough to breathe. Emma's face changed, but not in the way Vanessa expected. She looked sad, as if Vanessa had just confirmed something ugly about the world, not tempting about the offer. You think everyone has a price because you have never understood value, Emma said. Vanessa's voice cooled. Do not be naive. Love does not pay rent. No, but money does not teach loyalty. He is not who you think he is. Nate's blood went cold. Emma held the phone tighter. Maybe not. Maybe he is scared. Maybe he is proud. Maybe he is hiding more than he should. But I am not staying because he is rich, Vanessa. I am staying because he is scared. And scared people need truth around them, not vultures waiting for them to fall. Nate looked away because he could no longer bear being seen by the woman who still did not know the worst of him. Vanessa let out a small laugh without warmth. Then enjoy poverty with a man who may not deserve you. Emma ended the call. The apartment went silent except for a radiator knocking in the corner. Nate stood slowly. Emma. She lifted one hand, not angry, just tired. Not now. I have tutoring in 40 minutes. Tutoring? 3 students online. Their parents pay quickly. It will cover groceries and maybe one more envelope. He looked at the cash on the table, the missing necklace, the notebook full of employee names, and the ring still on her finger. The test had asked whether Emma would stay if he lost everything. It had never asked what she would give up to make S. By sunrise, Nate understood that the bankruptcy he had invented to test Emma's love had become the one thing capable of destroying everything she had tried to protect. The leaked memo sat open on his laptop while Brooklyn slowly brightened outside the narrow window, gray light touching the folding table, the envelopes of cash Emma had prepared, the yellow sticky note on the refrigerator, and the cheap throw blanket slipping from her shoulder as she slept on the couch. Preston's name appeared in the memo again and again, tied to anonymous investor briefings, board pressure points, and a strategy line that made Nate's blood turn cold. Emotional instability of chief executive officer creates opportunity for leadership review. It had never been only about Emma. Preston had taken Nate's ugliest fear, dressed it as advice, and turned it into a weapon aimed at the company. Nate looked at Emma's notebook, at the sentence she had written about him needing to believe he was more than what he owned. And for the first time in days, the choice became simple. Not easy. Simple. He could keep lying and lose her slowly, or tell the truth and lose her all at once. At 7:30, Emma woke to the smell of coffee and found Nate standing by the small kitchen sink in the same wrinkled shirt from the night before. His face looked different, not calmer, but stripped bare. "What happened?" she asked. He turned, and the words almost came. He wanted to tell her first, privately, gently, before cameras and board members and headlines turned his confession into a public collapse. But his phone rang before he could speak. The board chair, then legal counsel, then 3 reporters calling a number that should have been private. By 8:15, Whitaker Industries had announced an emergency press conference for noon. By 9, news trucks were already gathering outside Whitaker Tower. By 10, Nate stood in the Brooklyn bedroom packing his old briefcase while Emma watched from the doorway. "You are going to tell them the company is safe," she said. It was not a question. "I am going to tell them the truth." Something in his voice made her still. "What truth?" Nate looked at her then, and his silence gave away too much. Emma's eyes searched his face, and the room seemed to tighten around both of them. "Nate," she said slowly. "What truth?" He took one step toward her. "I need you to hear it from me." His phone buzzed again. "Preston." Nate ignored it. "There are parts of this that—" He stopped because there was no gentle way to say "I made your suffering part of an experiment." No soft language for "I let you sell pieces of your life while I measured your loyalty." Before he could force the sentence out, a car horn sounded below. Legal counsel was waiting. Emma looked toward the window, then back at him. The teacher in her, the woman who had learned to survive uncertainty by reading faces, understood that something was coming. "Go," she said quietly, "but do not come back with another half answer." Nate nodded, though the shame in his chest made it hard to breathe. At Whitaker Tower, the lobby was a storm of voices. Camera flashes, security badges, and employees trying not to look frightened. Nate moved through them with a kind of numb precision. Every face mattered now. The receptionist who had worked there 12 years. The junior analyst holding coffee with shaking hands. The maintenance man who nodded but did not smile. These were the people Emma had asked about first. These were the people his fear had placed in uncertainty. In the executive conference room, Preston waited with a revised statement. "You will deny insolvency, blame market rumor, and announce a temporary leave for health reasons," he said. Nate stared at him. "A leave. The board will accept it. You disappear for 6 weeks. I stabilize confidence. Emma stays away from microphones. We contain the personal angle." Nate placed the leaked memo on the table. Preston's face did not change immediately, but the room felt him go still. "You used me," Nate said. Preston folded his hands. "I protected the company from your weakness. My weakness was trusting you." Outside the glass wall, reporters were being seated. Counsel entered, then the board chair, then Vanessa, pale but composed, as if she had come to witness the final scene of a play she helped fund. Nate looked at all of them and felt no fear left, only consequence. At noon, he stepped behind the podium in the main auditorium of Whitaker Tower. Cameras lifted. Questions burst from every direction. He raised one hand, and the room quieted enough for his voice to carry. "Whitaker Industries is not bankrupt," he said. The room erupted instantly. He continued over the noise. "Our assets are not frozen. The company remains solvent. The rumors that created instability were fueled by false information, some of it spread by people inside my circle for personal gain." Behind the curtain near the side entrance, Emma had arrived without telling him. She stood half-hidden beside a security guard who recognized her and did not have the heart to stop her. At first, relief moved through her. He was not ruined. The employees would not lose everything. Then Nate lowered his eyes, and relief turned cold. "But that is not the whole truth," he said. "The first lie was mine." Emma stopped breathing. Nate gripped the edge of the podium. "I allowed a false story of personal financial collapse to be created because I wanted to test whether the woman I planned to marry loved me or my wealth. I told myself it was caution. It was not. It was fear. It was dishonesty. It was a betrayal of her trust." The cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted. Vanessa looked away. Preston stared at the floor. Emma stood frozen behind the curtain, each word finding the places where she had defended him. Fed him, packed boxes, sold her mother's necklace, faced Vanessa's table, and still believed his fear deserved tenderness. Nate's voice broke, but he did not stop. Emma Carlyle did not fail that test. "I did. She chose loyalty, sacrifice, and kindness while I chose suspicion. She asked about employees before herself. She gave what she had to help people affected by a crisis I let become public. She proved everything. I proved I did not deserve it." Emma slowly removed the engagement ring from her finger. Not with anger, with devastating calm. She placed it on a small side table beside the curtain. Nate saw the movement from the podium. His face changed as if the room had vanished and only that ring remained. When the press conference ended in chaos, he found her in the side hallway. She stood beneath a fluorescent light, pale, steady, unreachable. "Emma," he whispered. She looked at him, and the sadness in her eyes was worse than fury. "You did not test my love," she said. "You broke my trust. Then she walked past him toward the elevator, leaving the ring behind, and Nate realized the fortune he still had was nothing compared to the woman he had just lost. Emma did not go back to the Brooklyn apartment that night. She went to her mother's small house in Queens, the one with the cracked front steps, the faded blue shutters, and the kitchen table where she had once graded homework until midnight with instant coffee and a blanket over her shoulders. She placed her overnight bag by the door, sat in the quiet, and finally let the silence tell her what the cameras had not. Nate was not bankrupt. The apartment, the canceled wedding, the fear in his voice, the conversations about selling the ring, the shame she had tried to carry with him, all of it had been built on a test she had never agreed to take. Her mother found her at the table before dawn, still wearing the black dress from the press conference, her engagement finger bare. "Do you want me to hate him?" her mother asked gently. Emma stared at the pale circle where the ring had been. "No," she whispered. "I want him to understand that love is not something you trap to see if it survives." Across the city, Nate spent that same night inside Whitaker Tower, not in the corner office, but in the employee cafeteria on the 23rd floor, where fluorescent lights hummed above empty tables and vending machines. The board had tried to pull him into a private crisis meeting. Lawyers had tried to manage the statement. Preston had tried to leave through a side exit until security and counsel stopped him with the leaked memos already printed in hand. Vanessa had disappeared before reporters could ask why she had been present at every convenient humiliation. Nate could have hidden behind damage control. Instead, he stayed until sunrise with the legal team, human resources, and outside investigators. By morning, Preston Vale was suspended pending formal investigation. By noon, every employee affected by delayed renewals, frozen overtime, or benefit confusion received direct compensation from Nate's personal funds, not corporate accounts. By evening, Whitaker Industries issued a public correction naming the internal misinformation campaign and announcing an independent board review. Nate signed every document with a hand that did not shake, because repair was easier than facing the one person he could not repair with paperwork. 3 days later, he held another press conference. This time, there were no dramatic lights, no polished statement about leadership strength. He stood in the lobby of Whitaker Tower, where employees could see him from the balconies above. "I created the first falsehood because I was afraid," he said. "Others exploited that falsehood because I allowed secrecy to become power. That ends now." He announced a permanent employee hardship fund, transparent executive oversight, and the resignation of 2 board members who had coordinated with Preston. Then, in front of cameras, he held up a small velvet pouch. "This belonged to Emma Carlisle. She sold it to help employees who were harmed by uncertainty I caused. I bought it back from the pawn shop. It is not mine to return publicly, because dignity is not a performance. But I want every person here to know this company was protected more by her character than by my judgment." Emma saw the clip online 2 days later in her old classroom, where she had returned as a substitute teacher because children did not ask about stock prices when they needed help with fractions. She turned the volume off before the reporters began shouting. Her chest hurt, but not in the same way. The truth was finally walking without disguise. Weeks passed. Nate did not send flowers. He did not send jewelry. He did not send a car. He sent one letter, handwritten, 3 pages long, with no excuses. He wrote about his father, about fear, about Preston, about the moment she put the ring on the kitchen counter and called it just a stone if someone needed help more. He wrote, "You were never responsible for healing what fear damaged in me. I should have trusted you before asking you to prove yourself." Emma read it twice, then placed it in a drawer, not because she had forgiven him, but because for the first time he had not asked her to. 2 months later, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, she found him outside the school after dismissal. No cameras, no security line, no luxury car at the curb. Just Nate in a dark coat, holding 2 paper cups of deli coffee and standing far enough away that she could choose whether to cross the distance. Children ran past him with backpacks. Bouncing, a yellow school bus hissed at the curb. The city smelled like rain, pavement, and second chances that had not yet been granted. Emma stopped beneath the awning. "You should not be here if this is a gesture." Nate nodded. "It is not." He held out 1 paper cup, but did not step closer. "Black coffee. Too much sugar on the side because you say coffee should be allowed to make its own decisions." She almost smiled, and that almost hurt both of them. From his coat pocket, he took the tiny pearl necklace and placed it in her palm. "I bought it back. I should have done it the moment I knew. I am sorry it took me losing you to understand what it meant." Emma closed her fingers around the necklace. The pearl was warm from his pocket. "And the ring?" Nate looked down. "I have it, but I did not bring it to ask for anything today." She searched his face, looking for the old panic, the need to control the ending. It was still there somewhere, but quieter now, no longer driving. "What did you come for?" she asked. Nate took a breath. "To tell you I resigned from the private foundation board Vanessa controlled. To tell you Preston is under investigation and cannot touch the company. To tell you the employees you helped have been made whole. And to tell you that I am in Thera,